All right, folks, welcome to October. We are 20 or 21 days until the election, depending how you count. Thank you. So appropriately, we have teamed up with NYAAPOR, which I'm sure I'm getting, still not pronouncing it correctly, but...
Well, pronunciation got in a slide.
Yeah, you got that, right? So we're teaming up with a political meetup group to talk about politics. Now, we're not going to be taking any political stances here. We're talking about the mechanics of politics, the data science of politics, because again, we have about 3 weeks left to go. So I'm going to kick it off to Shobak to talk about NYAAPOR, however you pronounce it.
Yeah. Welcome everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming. I think that this is the first joint meetup with for NYHackr, probably. So
it's been 15 years.
Yeah.
To tell what we did in the very beginning, but it's at least the first in a decade.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna go with it, and we can edit it out if it turns out to be untrue. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about NYAAPOR. So starting with how to pronounce NYAAPOR. NYAAPOR. Really missed opportunity to have that R look like a different R. Really missed opportunity. Sorry about that, guys. But so what is NYAAPOR? So basically NYAAPOR is your home for anything to do with public opinion research. And so what is public opinion research? It's all of these things, right? The things that we do programming on include polling, survey research, UX, market research, social science, more broadly speaking, data science. So if you do any of these things or are interested in any of these things, you should definitely talk to me and come to our events. So our events range from workshops to roundtables to networking events, happy hours. We're fun, I promise. We hang out after our events. It's a good group. We have seminars too. We even have a paper discussion club if that's your thing. This is an example of an event that we had, a really popular event that we had earlier this year. There's going to be there's more where that came from. We have a host of generative AI related, large language model related programs coming up in the spring. Speaking of future events, this is something that's coming up in 2 weeks, and also speaking of the election. So I hope you'll join us for that. This is on Zoom. And tell your friends and parents about it. I'm sure your parents are pestering you about the election. So this is a very parent-friendly event, I would say. So we have not just one, but 2 election-oriented events coming up. So one before the election, the one that I just told you about, and one after the election. So we actually have folks from the news networks who are making the calls on election night joining us. So you definitely won't want to miss that. And lastly, if you want to find out more and keep track of all these events, you can sign up for our newsletter. And while you're there, you should listen to this guy and become a member to attend these events, mostly for free. And if it helps, you can imagine him saying this in a Brooklyn accent. So that's it. With that, I will turn it over to Jared.
Thank you. And this is the first time we actually have slides for the meetup, so you encourage that. Awesome. I think this is the most formal we've ever announced this meetup group in all the 15 years. So.
Thanks, we're sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So folks, we'll see how this goes. It might have him to blame forever now if we keep these things going. So most of you are probably tuned in here. You all know about the NYHackr meetup, but just a refresher for anyone who's new, because anyone come from NYAAPOR. Hey, finally got it, NYAAPOR. We've been going for about 15 years, so we have about 15,000 members in this user group. We have a monthly meetup, which a lot of you are here for. Some of you are virtually. And if you're here, I already see some of you. You have pizza in your hands right now. Then we're going to have a talk. Then we're going to go to the bar. That's the meetup. This used to be the R meetup, but for about 13 years, it's been the Open Statistical Programming meetup. So we have talks about R, Python, Julia, Stan, C++, anything that's open source or data science related. And the talks range from beginner talks to advanced talks in between. It's really a broad mixture. If you go through the website, you're going to find so many different types of talks at varying levels throughout the years. There's about 10 plus years of recorded talks and 15 years worth of slideshows. And you can also go here to sign up for our Slack, because you go to nyhackr.slack.com, you'll need to join. The link to join is up here. And of course, the website is built using R. So, how can we not? So the very first thing we always do, a lot of my regulars know this, is we ask, who is hiring? Is anyone hiring today? Or are we waiting for 22 days to hire? All right. No one's hiring. So if you're not hiring in this room, but you're attending virtually and you want to hire someone either in this room or virtually a member of this community, you can go to the Slack, nyhackr.slack.com, and go to the job postings channel and post your job there. It's very appropriately named, so post your job, find people to hire. We've gotten many, many, many people jobs throughout the years by simply asking the question, who's hiring? So please, if you're hiring, go to there. The second most important question for this meetup is the pizza poll. How do you like the pizza? Some of you are already reaching for your phones. I love it. If you go to bit.ly/pizza poll, you'll find a 5-point scale so you could rank the pizza and let us know how it is. This month it comes from Upside Pizza, not their original location, which is in Midtown. This is their Nolita location. Is that Nolita location? Hopefully it'll be consistently the same. Let us know what you think about it. All right, go in there. For those of you who are not used to this, I want to see everyone in this room wait a slice of pizza, pull out your phone. I'm judging anyone who's not pulling out their phone. That's right, polling. We need someone to correct this polling data because I'm sure there's all sorts of issues with it, right? But it's longitudinal, and we have repeats, so you can calibrate it, right?
So we can be wrong over time.
There you go. It is highly scientific. I highly encourage everyone to do it. And folks who are not here in person, if you're watching from home and you aren't eating pizza, you are eating pizza, let us know what you're eating. There are 2 ways to communicate with us. It's either right through the chat on YouTube, you could ask questions there, or you can ask it here at the NYAAPOR Slack and the monthly meetup chat. Before you ask a question though, tell us what you're eating. If you have a great beer or a soda or non-alcoholic beverage or pizza or dumplings or noodles, let us know what you're eating, or any other food, obviously. Let us know. Just be a part of this community. Join into this. All right? Speaking of politics and government, we have the R in Government conference coming up October 29th and 30th, so you can attend the NYAAPOR virtual thing. Then the next day, come and join us here. There will be workshops on the 28th, and then there are 2 days of the conference on the 29th and 30th. This will be 6-7 days before the election, which, by the way, everyone, if you're not registered to vote, is it too late to register to vote, probably?
Depends where you live.
Depends where you live. Register to vote and vote. Or don't if you missed the vote. Sorry, folks. Right? But attend the conference no matter what, right? It's a great conference about how to use R and Friends. It's not just R, it's R and Friends. How to apply that to the government. And this might mean federal, local, state. We've had international governments. We've had just NGOs. We've had nonprofits. It's a lot of really great talks. It's held at Georgetown, both in person and virtual. We will give away 2 tickets today to the conference, one to someone sitting in the room and one to someone attending virtually. And either ticket you get is good for either in person or virtual, whatever you choose. For anyone, and this is the last time we're giving away tickets because this is the last meetup before the conference. It's just in 2 weeks, roughly. For anyone who doesn't win a ticket but wants to attend, you can use code, it's not up here, but you can use code NYHackR to get a 20% discount on tickets, both virtual and in person, and for the workshops. So definitely take advantage of that. The website is rstats.ai, and it's actually rstats.ai/gov, because rstats.ai will also take you to the New York conference. And on there, you can find 10 years worth of talks from the conferences. So it's a really good resource to learn more and more about data and coding. And next month, mark your calendars. I think we have a date ready for this. Do we have? Yes, November 19th. We have Eric. Where are you, Eric? There you are. Eric is going to be giving a talk about exploring Pixar films. It's going to be nice and lighthearted a week after the election. So, thank you for doing that for us. If you want to learn more about the meetup, there's many ways to be in touch. We're still on Twitter because we haven't figured out how to use Mastodon. But we're at NYHackR. Of course, our Slack, which I told you about repeatedly, nyhackr.slack.com. The meetup site, meetup.com/nyhackr, is where we actually post everything. And of course, you RSVP at nyhackr.org, and that's where you can find all the old videos. So, hope that everyone remembers this. Oh yeah, we forgot the bar. We were going to go to the bar afterwards. That was in one of the slides that we're going to the bar. George, what bar are we physically closest to that isn't loud? Say the Half Pint.
Yes.
All right, Half Pint's what we're saying for now, folks. I know in the past someone has watched virtually, then joined us at the bar afterwards. Totally, yeah, seriously. Totally cool. Come do that again if you want to join us. All right, everyone else here. And again, if you're not a drinker, have a non-alcoholic beverage. We're cool. Or don't drink anything. Be thirsty. Whatever you want to do. Right?
Half Pint's not allowed. Amity Hall.
We're not going to Amity Hall.
We're going to
Half Pint. We're definitely going to Half Pint. All right, great. So everyone remember that? Where are we going? All right, hope to see you there. All right, so for this month, we're doing something different. This is probably about the first time in about 15 years we've had this many speakers in one shot. Right? We did lightning talks in 2009, maybe 2010, And I think sometime around 2013, we had like 2 speakers, but we're doing 3 speakers tonight. So it's going to be the first time in a long time we're doing this many speakers. You're going to save your questions for the end. So if you're in the room, at the end of the meetup, you can ask all of your questions from all 3 speakers. And if you're virtual and you have a question, I said in the slideshow, ask it in the meetup chat or ask it on the YouTube channel, preferably in the meetup chat, and then we will collate those questions and ask it of the speakers. Okay? So, everyone good with this? Everyone knows the plan? All right. Then please welcome for our first of our 3 speakers, Anusha.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Anusha. I'm currently a graduate student at Columbia University focusing on quantitative methods in the social sciences. And today I'm going to be talking about some side research that I've been doing, which is looking at New York Times data in 2020 using machine learning models. So just an overview on what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to give an introduction of current literature that's out there and conducting media analysis and how I got about measuring my different variables. Research methodology, so how the machine learning models, supervised learning were employed, how the data was collected, data analysis, and conclusions. And then I have a image of just kind of a lot of the events that happened in 2020, which I felt like there were a lot of significant events happening each month. So definitely a lot to talk about and cover today. So I know there's a lot of text, but I'm going to break it down. 2020 was a really big year, especially when it came towards going online. You might have had a lot of Zoom meetings back to back, especially those of you who are in classes, getting up 2 minutes before Zoom class, Zoom University. But yeah, 2020 just showed us like the importance of having technology around us, like just staying up to date with our friends from across the world, and also just getting the news. And if you remember, 4 years ago, we also had an election in the States here, but a lot of that had to be done digitally. So even getting the news and all of that was done through like social media, Twitter, and even people were watching a lot of different news shows as well too. And also we had, in addition to the pandemic, we also had the murder of George Floyd, which happened around like May 25th. And this is important because this is like part of what I'm going to be talking about, like especially looking at date when it comes to analyzing the articles. And I was reading literature on, just because my data set that I have with New York Times doesn't show you a lot more of the engagement variables. So I had to kind of adapt and use like the number of comments because that was the only variable that I could ideally work with just to see like how people were engaging during the pandemic and communicating during that time. There was not much information on the number of likes, shares, and clicks. So that's why I have this on here. Like usually when we think of engagement, like with social media, we rely on the retweets or the shares or the likes and comments. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I adapted it for this study. So I just found this little infographic. I tried to find a holistic one of 2020, but that was very hard to find just because there was something going on, especially globally, for each month. So just a brief overview, like kind of more of a timeline on COVID, and then elections were kind of picking up towards, especially with the nominating convention happening around August and September, and then a lot of the subsequent events happening towards like the end of the year. So I'll move on to the research methodology part. So as I mentioned, I decided to look at New York Times data because I feel like with the current literature that's out there, it's been very focused on Twitter and Reddit, and I feel like looking at news articles itself gives us a lot of insights as to how other people might be engaging with different articles that have been coming out. So using the New York Times Community API, the articles were collected from the beginning of the year, so Jan 1st, and all the way to the end of the year, December 31st, 2020. And a total of 16,787 articles were collected, and went through the same like pre-processing and analyzed, and the information that was included from the API were the article specific sections. So was it in the new, like opinion, US news, science, the headline, the abstract, which is like a brief summary of the article, keywords, the word count of the article, publication date, number of comments. So it doesn't tell you like specifically what the comments were, just the number itself. And then I created sentiment. So I did sentiment analysis specifically for the abstract because I feel like we wouldn't get that much information on headline. And then popularity was taking the number of comments and taking an average of that. And then I employed supervised machine learning models just because I was mostly dealing with label data. It would be kind of interesting though to see down the road like what it would look like with different kinds of machine learning methods. But the main variables that I decided to look at were sentiment, the word count of the article, the specific section it was in, the publication date, and their impact on the popularity variable, which was based on the number of comments. And the section variable was numerically encoded. So we were dealing more with like regression machine learning models, not really more of the classification side of things. So I have here 5, but I actually looked at 6 different models. Trees is missing, so I looked at linear regression, ridge, lasso, random forest, and gradient boosting, and as well as trees as well too. I picked these models just because it seemed simple enough to kind of run and do the analysis, and I wasn't dealing with that many variables. If I was dealing more with like the shares and other, I think, yeah, like shares, likes, and engagement with the more engagement metrics with the article, then I think I would have employed other methods, but decided to stick with those for now. And then after I decided which model performed the best, I employed that and tried to find, like based on I looked at 3 key events, the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and the US elections, like where the top 10 sections were for those specific keywords, and then like when were those articles coming out during those period of time. So that's just like the output that I got. So you can kind of see that the linear ridge and lasso performed worse than the forest, trees, and gradient boosting, but I ended up choosing gradient boosting just because it had a lower mean squared error, and the R squared seemed to be a lot higher compared to the other models. And then I did a feature importance graph for my gradient boosting model. And you can see here among the 4 different variables that the section where the article was hosted in, that seemed to have more of an impact on the number of comments that an article would get. And then word count followed right after, publication date, and then sentiment as well too. Maybe that might be due to because we're looking at the abstract, and abstract is still a little bit more neutral in tone compared to the comments themselves or even the content of the article. And then I looked at the overall corpus of the articles that I was looking at, so all of the 16,787. So these were the average number of comments. So you can see that opinion was the top section, most popular, which is kind of expected because I feel like people who have like really hot takes or differing opinions would want to comment on there, and then followed by Sunday Review, video, US, Upshot, International, Home, World, and I have the specific number breakdown as well too. So it had around like 916 comments, and then US had about like, I think 323, and then business was the last one. And then I looked at also publication date. This one was a super interesting one because I was trying to figure out like where most of the articles, like on average, like where was the kind of highest sort of engagement among the top 10 sections. And you can kind of see here, it was all mostly during the summer months between June 15th to August 9th, I believe. So you can kind of see here like where the most amount of engagement would have been time-wise. So yeah, just looking at the top 10 sections, I decided to look at the publication date, so kind of between the months of June and August. And then I decided to apply these features that I showed you, that feature importance plot. I applied it to the 3 key events that I was looking at. So we have Black Lives Matter. So these were the 5 or 6 main keywords that I used, and then kind of took like an overall average of the whole corpus of articles that do have those keywords, and it was about like 409. comments. And then you can kind of see here the amount of engagement that the Black Lives Matter specific corpus gets, which opinion was like the first out of all of the events that I looked at, and then followed by video, technology, etc. And then I also looked at COVID-19, so those were some of the other keywords that I used too. I was working with, I was trying to limit the number of keywords just so that I wouldn't add additional articles that might have not been related specific to COVID. So this one, if you look, and then when I made that specific like data set, the COVID specific articles had like an average metric of 307 comments. And then you can see here, opinion, Sunday Review, US, like even technology was like kind of in the bottom of the top 10. And then the US election, I sticked with using Trump, Biden, because they were the candidates for that election. And then I noticed with a lot of the other election-related articles, like election, presidential, were all mentioned. And for an average of that was about like around 600 comments. And you can still see here that Opinion US and Sunday Review topped the top 10 section. And then New York somehow made it like on the 7th. So what I just showed you was just looking at how the data that you get from New York Times, how that's able to kind of tell you what it means to look at engagement, especially there were so many different key events during the pandemic, and employing machine learning to tell you what features are relevant in trying to understand how people are interacting, especially with digital media outside of social media. So it seems to me that publication date, section word count, and also sentiment as well too, up to an extent, were significant indicators of popularity of an article. And especially when we're looking at the publication date as well too, you can kind of see that a lot of articles kind of came from like a very short time period, which was kind of during the summer. And I equated to how close it was to the murder of George Floyd, and kind of how the pandemic was also picking up as well too. And even with politics as well, you saw like rallies being held and also gearing up for the election season now that the candidates were decided that we're moving on to the general election. So there were definitely some things that kind of showed. And then, this was just kind of what I was saying, like a lot of the different events that I was looking at like came from this specific time frame of June 14th through August 9th. So, yeah. And then just some future directions that I was thinking about is maybe kind of comparing it between what's going on in this year to 2020, just to kind of see like, are those features still relevant? Do they have a role at the moment from 2020 to 2024? So kind of doing more of a temporal analysis. And then I also wanted to look at how keywords themselves might also have an impact on the engagement of an article, because when people see those specific keywords, they might kind of gravitate towards reading more about that article or commenting, leading to the number of comments to go up or down, and then maybe looking more closely at sentiment and looking specifically at the comment section on kind of what that kind of shares and entails. Yeah, these are my sources. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening, and then yeah, happy to take any questions at the end.
Next up.
Thank you.
I'm Andy with Grow Progress, going to talk about testing political ads. Great. Give you a sense of what I'm doing today. I'm going to give a brief sermon about the importance of testing your ads. Going to talk about Grow Progress, how we fit into that business of testing your ads to know what works. Going to give a brief overview of some of the tools I want to talk about in terms of things that can help you make this sort of testing more efficient. Talk about some of a simulation study we did to make progress on this question of whether or not a pre-post design is more efficient in general, and I'll conclude with some general thoughts about testing your ads. Okay, so sermon time. It's increasingly an industry standard in politics and advocacy to test your ads. Every major campaign, every major party body, unions, PACs, everyone tests their ads to know before they spend millions of dollars on an ad buy to see what works. The basic argument for this is really, really, really simple. I think we can all just think about our own experience to think about this, but we have lots of data supporting this too. Ads vary significantly in how effective they are and how effective they are for different audiences. So that's something you need to test to understand, because I can't tell you what works just looking at an ad. A media consultant might have some intuition from years of a career, but they're not going to be able to tell you with any degree of precision whether this ad or that ad works wonderfully. And lastly, testing is just cheap compared to a large ad buy. If you're going to go up on TV in a primetime spot with dozens of GRPs, and that's going to cost you millions of dollars, you should spend the couple thousands of dollars to test your ads. For a sense of scale of just how important this is, some recent work by Hewitt et al. Suggests spending about 10 to 15% of your media budget on this type of testing before anything even goes live is optimal. So yeah, we built Grow Progress to make that process a lot easier for our politics and advocacy and corporate clients. We provide a self-service tool where you can upload your ad, whether it's a video, still image, text if you're early in the creative development process. You can target whatever audience you want within some, within some minor constraints that we set. We set up an online survey experiment to test the effectiveness of your creative, and you get results back in a couple of days, maybe a little bit longer if you're testing in a niche geography. I think of my job as working on the accuracy and affordability of parts of that. So when I think about accuracy, I'm thinking about how do we weight things well. There's a huge discussion going on right now about what things are the best things to weight on. That was my last NYHackr talk. You can go watch that if you want. This week, I'm going to be talking about something that makes your testing more affordable, which is called a pre-post design. So let's get into the basics of how we normally test ads, and then I'll talk about how a pre-post design modifies that. In a typical design, right, we sample from your target population. Let's say it's registered voters in a battleground state. We're going to quota that, weight that, make sure that it actually represents who you're interested in generalizing to, randomize those folks into treatment and control groups if you have multiple treatments, multiple treatment groups. And then we can use the difference between the outcomes you've set up on our platform to measure the differences between those in the treatment and the control group to model and measure how effective your ads are. This is a lot more reliable than asking people like how they feel their opinion changed or how an ad made them feel, things like this that are sometimes done. Yeah, technical audience, not going to belabor the point of RCTs are important and you should run them to know if things actually work. How does this change if we use what's called a pre-post design? Well, not a lot, really. Right before we randomize people into that treatment or control group, we're going to do a pre-treatment ask of your outcome question. So this would look like saying, on the election on November 5th, are you planning to vote for Joe Biden? Or are you planning to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? It's hard-coded. I've been saying Joe Biden for years. And then we'll ask you again after you've seen the treatment, and then when we model the treatment effects, we'll use that initial ask of it, and that will give us a much more precise estimate because unsurprisingly, how you felt like 3 minutes ago is a really good predictor of how you felt right after the ad. So you might be wondering, though, is there some bias here? And why would we want to do this? The really obvious upshot of this is a huge variance reduction in those estimates, right? A pre-post design can be twice as precise. Obviously, this will vary test to test. It can be as precise as a test with twice as much sample without this. However, there's some real risk of bias here. This is a NYAAPOR talk, so I'm going to have to ask people to think like a survey respondent for a little. If I'm like, hey, Gerald, how do you feel about Kamala Harris? You don't have to actually do the response thing. You're eating. And then I show you a 15-second ad, and then I'm like, how do you feel about Kamala Harris now? You can imagine there might be some bias here. And we can sort of parse this out more precisely, but maybe it's a question that people want to feel like they're being consistent, so they won't update their view even if it did change. You could imagine there's some social desirability bias where you figure out what's going on, and you're like, well, you're trying to change my opinion, so I'll change it for this little survey. Think about how you'd respond, right? There is some real risk of bias here. I don't have time to do the whole literature review thing here, but the literature is mixed on whether there's this type of bias at all. In some work on field experiments, so like get a piece of a mail or you see a TV ad. Then a couple days later, we survey you again. In situations like that, there's been some literature suggesting this type of bias doesn't really exist, or at least is so small as to be pretty manageable. But if we're doing something like we're doing, which is forced exposure in survey, you're responding to that second ask right after you see it, then there's some work finding a bit of bias. And so the question becomes, how do we navigate that and how do we formalize that statistical trade-off? Our view at Grow Progress is that there are real meaningful trade-offs here. Usually, though, this pre-post design is going to be superior. The research I'm talking about today is really about exploring that trade-off. So let's sort of formalize this just a little. There are lots of ways you can think about this, but let's say we care about something like root mean squared error. You know, if you're going to test again and again and again, over all of those iterations, which of these designs would be overall better, right? There's a variance component, there's a bias component. How do those trade off against one another? Some elements of what would affect that trade-off, right, are the amount of bias you see, the direction of the bias, the true effect size, because if you're trying to measure a tiny little effect on something like presidential vote choice in the battleground states where people have mostly made up their minds and have been hammered with ads, anything we can do to reduce variance of our estimates matters a lot more. Same idea with n size. And then, of course, there's an element of noisiness of respondent preferences just overall, right? If we're asking about presidential vote choice, people's opinions are going to be a lot less wobbly than if we're asking about how you feel as New Yorkers about SB 1043 in California. Cool. So the way we've made progress on this issue at Grow Progress is largely through two tools, a stimulation study, which allow us to sort of think through how different combinations of these parameters trade off against one another, and then some experiments actually when we've looked at the simulation study, allowing us to say, okay, here's the point at which the design would stop, one design would start being better than the other. Does that amount of bias exist? So before we get into the talking about this and varying all of the parameters at once, let's learn to read one of these plots at once. On the y-axis here, I have root mean squared error. On the x-axis, I've got bias as a proportion of the treatment effect. So if your treatment effect was 5 percentage points, the 1.0 here would be you have a bias that's as large as that, so a full 5 points. This green line here is the pre-post design or pre-treatment question design. The cyan line is the no pre-treatment question here. And you can see that, and each point I should say on this graph represents about 5,000 simulations, so simulation error isn't really a big deal here. You can see that when that bias ends up around a quarter of the true treatment effect, in this strange world where we're only using 400 respondents, the treatment effect is 20 percentage points, that's when the pre-post design stops being better than the no pre-post design. Okay, so this is sort of helpful because it gives us a sense of what the trade-offs are like. But the real fun is doing this and varying all of the parameters at once. This is the sort of thing I do for fun. So you can immediately sort of start to see some structure here, right? And we're varying now as we go left to right, we're varying total n size in the test. And as we're going down, we're increasing the treatment effect. And you can already start to see some structure jumping out pretty quickly here. The bias doesn't have, if you're testing really small treatment effects like you might see on presidential vote choice or something like that, the pre-treatment question or pre-post design is pretty dominant up till maybe somewhere over there where you're testing at quite large n sizes. On the other hand, if you're in a more down ballot race, maybe it's actually not an obvious simplistic trade-off for you, and you do need to sort of think through these trade-offs. The last thing I'll say is this is just sort of varying two things at once. We could also think about varying the noise and holding the n size constant. There's a lot of different things we could vary here. I just wanted to sort of give a sense for how this type of framework is helpful for understanding the trade-offs between the designs. In general, though, our sense is a lot of our clients are really going to be, especially this cycle and a presidential cycle in the upper half of the graph, and often to the right of this graph as well, right? So it's pretty clear that we should usually recommend a pre-treatment question-based or pre-post design to them. The next thing we can do is talk about, okay, we know some degree of bias is where at n equals 2,000 and a treatment effect of 5 percentage points, that's the point where the pre-post design might start being worse. We can run an experiment that's a nested experiment where one arm does the pre-post design, one arm doesn't. That allows us to subtract them out and get a measure of the difference. And we've actually done tests like that to get a sense of, like, for certain questions that our clients care a lot about, how big are the effects? Or how big is that bias, excuse me. And that allows us to make more confident recommendations in these places. So yeah, pre-post designs are usually a really good deal. But it took us a little longer maybe to work our way around that, and we wanted to do some work to really be comfortable in trading that off. As a company, we've got a lot of great tools, both expertise from thinking about this a lot, tools from looking at what typical effect sizes in our industry for various types of ads are. Our persuasion library helps a lot with that. And these are things that can help you make these trade-offs. One thing I'll note for this particular audience, since it's sort of a mix of pollster, Politico folks, and market researchy folks, I've heard relatively more certainty about pre-post always being great from politics and advocacy folks, and relatively more skepticism from some market researchers I've worked with. So if you're at either end of the spectrum, I've hoped I've sort of nudged you towards the middle, towards sometimes this makes sense, sometimes this doesn't. Yeah, so if you've got questions, take them at the end, but if you want to explore testing your ads, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Hi everybody, I'm Manu. I'm a PhD candidate at Columbia University, and I'm presenting some parts of my dissertation research that I've been working on. Overall, I'm going to talk about how bots on Twitter not only affect Twitterscape, but way more than that in traditional media landscapes. And before we get into that, just why you should care about this question. The big thing about social media is that the quality of information on social media makes it special. Facebook Marketplace is better than Craigslist because you know who's posting it. There's some sort of trust. I always look at Google reviews before I go to a restaurant. But now if I knew that these reviews, these numbers, these things that I trust can be manipulated by a third party, that goes away. Bots are also excellent at astroturfing, because astroturfing basically means a bunch of people coming together to fake organic support. And most platforms have a rich get richer dynamic where bots or anything that is creating more engagement gets more engagement. So if you get viral or if you're trending, which again, remember, you can do with the help of bots, the platform will reward you. And last but not least, the focus of today's talk is user engagement quite often drives editorial decisions in traditional media, so digital journalism, and even like TV media. So Fox News, MSNBC, I've checked like a bunch of national channels. And why this is such a complex problem is because detection, of course, is hard. As smart as bots get, the detection techniques have to catch up with that. There are regulation challenges. So, First Amendment rights and free speech. And there is also a little bit of a mixed incentive. If you are the owner of Twitter, do you want to remove every account that has a ton of engagement? So it's a really hard problem, which brings me into my data section. What I've done here is gone to all the Twitter pages of every American politician in November 2022, all the senators, all the Congress House members, and scraped their tweets 1 week before and 1 week after the election. Everybody who retweeted this person, I got a list of that, and subset that, or took a random sample of that list, ran it through the Botometer API to get a percentage of the bot followers per politician. So remember, now this is my primary predictor variable. How many bot folks were maybe active on your page? My primary dependent variable is some measure of popularity in digital journalism. And here I've scraped like massive amounts of data set using GDELT. So all sorts of good quality, bad quality newspapers over 2 years. And I'm trying to find out how many times politicians were mentioned per day. The same thing for television. Use the video to close caption, and from that closed caption text, extract how many times person X was named. So remember, now I have a setup. Some bots on this side trying to predict how many times you might have been mentioned, talked about, discussed on this side. With that in mind, let me just give you some descriptive data. And remember, please take this with a grain of salt, because none of this is causal yet. I'm just trying to describe to you what are the universes in which someone might benefit from using a bot. So here I'm showing you margin. So when the margin is really low, the race is tight, the bot percentage seems to be a little bit higher. 4.5% high, so just to give you a sense, 11% is the mean, and like a really high bot percentage might be 20%. The standard deviation is about 6 or 7. So little less than 1 standard deviation. So okay, when there is a small margin, maybe high bots. What about swing states? Interestingly, most swing states also seem to have more bot activity than their neighbors. And I was like, what the hell is happening with New Hampshire? And then I went and looked back. In November 2022, Maggie Hassan was running a very close and competitive race against Don Bulldog. So I was like, okay, maybe that explains something. So sort of picture is coming up in my head. I also thought, incorrectly so, that maybe younger politicians might rely on this more. If you have no political experience, maybe you would. No, it did not really seem like that. A lot of research that studies bots comes from Europe, and they found that extreme right-wingers in Europe love to use this strategy because they don't get much purchase in mainstream media. Not so in the US, especially when you're not looking at the national election. So I was really surprised by this. What is even more interesting is this. There is a slight, and again, don't read too much into it, slight positive relationship between your ideology and the bot activity on your page. So center left, little bit more bot activity. But again, it's a very good time to remind everyone in the audience and whoever's watching at home, we have no proof, and I'm not claiming that these are the politicians that bought the bots. They were just found on that page. Who bought them, who paid for them? It could be your partner who loves you and wants you to win. It could be the DNC, RNC. It could be Russia. It could be China. It could be me sitting in a basement. Nobody knows. So let's not attribute blame. But there is, and I also have more stuff which I'm happy to talk about in discussion, relationships with some financing, relationships with more electoral incentives. But overall, there is something about politicians on the left. When they're running very competitive elections, bots appear. Okay, all of this is descriptive, and I hope this makes my diff results, which I'm about to show you, a little bit more palatable. So now I'm going to get into the causal inference part of the story. I think most of you know that Elon Musk took over Twitter, and it was quite something. What happened then was that a lot of people started leaving the platform. But here I'm showing you parallel trends between politicians who were high bot engagement folks, pre-treatment. So before November, high bot engagement folks that I had identified with some number of followers, they started losing followers at a much faster rate than people who were low bot engagement folks. And I'm going to use this point to say, parallel trends. Nobody buys a different diff without parallel trends. So of course, we got to have that. But also, if you don't want to use that, this is the event study. So like a dynamic different diff with time on this axis. And all I'm trying to say here is politicians of some variety that I had identified 6 months before anything happened started losing a bunch of followers. And my claim here is that they started losing followers because they had a bunch of bots on the platform, and when the Twitter API killed activity of this sort, they started losing followers and maybe retweets, and more on that in a second. And you may think that, hey, maybe they just weren't that popular anymore. Maybe that's why they started losing followers, because that is entirely possible. But that is not what happened. So on Instagram, the difference between high and low, nothing really. On Facebook, that is the graph of high and low, the number of likes distributed by time, no real difference. So there's no real difference on any other platform except Twitter, only for people who I had identified as high bot folks. Okay, what do you do with this information? And this slide is going to sort of summarize what I'm about to say, because we're human. We see something with a lot of engagement, likes, retweets, and we're like, hey, maybe this guy's about to win. Maybe they're a little bit trustworthy. And journalists are humans too. And they want to write about what we want to read about. So newsrooms are making a lot of editorial decisions based on maybe who's going viral on Twitter. Without realizing you can go viral on Twitter by just paying someone money. So, I mean, kinda. So, okay, what do I have here? So that is the visual representation of exactly this event study. And in yellow, I'm showing you the low bot folks and the number of times they were covered in digital journalism. A little bit of a decline in 2023 because 2023 wasn't really an election year. People weren't talking about politics as much. But I don't think it's a surprise to see that the black line, which is the high bot folks, lost a ton more coverage for whatever reason. And the blue line at the bottom is just folks for whom I couldn't generate good estimates. And I've done a whole host of robustness tests, which I'm happy to talk about. But the big difference here that I'm showing you is compared to low bot users, high bot users lost a lot of coverage in digital journalism. And if you're skeptic, I'm reporting within individual results. So I'm not comparing the Nancy Pelosi's of the world to the Jerry Nadler. I'm only showing you how much an individual politician lost coverage. So I'm comparing you to you, so politician fixed effects, whichever way you want to hear me. And so just putting that number in perspective, again, regression is at the end if you want to look at it. That decline is about a 30% decline. And what it means is politicians in the pre-treatment period who could have been mentioned about 150 times per month in all sorts of sources saw a decline. So high bot politicians saw a decline of about 46 fewer articles per month. What about broadcast TV and television? So I admit I'm showing you two of the more impressive differences. So there we have Fox News and MSNBC. And again, even before I show you, this is just the means. But you can tell that pre-November, pre-API shutdown, the difference between high and low was there, but not so much. That gap grew. And what does that gap mean substantively? It meant that high bot engagement politicians on national TV, on Fox News lost about 42% of name mentions. And when I say name mentions, just how many times you're mentioned, talked about, discussed. And on MSNBC, about 31%. These are big numbers. And I've taken you through a lot of data, a lot of numbers. I wanted to sort of end on a little bit more fun note. So for the skeptics in the crowd who think that social media popularity doesn't really matter, and maybe I'm just harping on a point which is entirely separate. So this is from another chapter of my dissertation where I run some survey experiments. And I show people something like this. And these are manipulated. So this is a complete factorial design. Candidate A, candidate B, I've blurred out their names. The content of the message is exactly the same. Treatment group got this. The control group will get exactly this, but these numbers will be flipped. And I asked them, who do you think is likely to win? And what do you think they said? Holding everything else constant. Most people chose the candidate with higher social media. And then when I presented these results to my advisor, he's like, yeah, I'm sure you'd find results because this is not realistic. Who makes a political decision like this? You've hidden out all the information that they could have used to maybe make decisions. I was like, that's a fair critique. Got to do it better. So ran a second survey experiment where these are two real politicians who ran in a real election in the primaries, Michael Cassidy, Michael Guest, and these are screenshots from their own campaign pages. This is what I showed the control group. And this is what I showed the treatment group, so the information plus treatment. You can clearly see that Michael Cassidy has a ton more followers. And I asked the same question. A, who would you vote for? B, who do you think won? And surprising absolutely no one. Most people chose Michael Cassidy. Now the fun cheeky thing here is Michael Cassidy actually lost. So it's not because he is an objectively better candidate, which is why most people are picking him. So when people knew nothing about both of these folks, between the treatment group and between the control group and the treatment group, most people were almost swayed by his social media following and his engagement. Anywho, it has been a long day. This is a Tuesday night. This is the last presentation. So if you've zoned out for the entire talk, you just have 3 things that you want to remember from this talk. I want you to remember that voters use social media popularity as a heuristic for trust, for electability, for probability of success. And again, there's a lot more evidence in that paper, which I haven't shown you. The second, the Twitter API shutdown was a very cool, unique opportunity to study how something from social media could bleed over to traditional media, which brings me to my third point. Traditional media showed a very unexpected vulnerability from bot manipulation, because I was able to see it like that in the previous step. And this is one of those one shot, you can do it this time, the bots went away. These are the people who lost followers, and this is how they lost grace on Fox News. Anywho, I'd like to ask most of my viewers this. So if you think that this is an easy question and bots are, dumb and you could really guess. So you have 2 accounts here, and just take a guess. And don't spend too much time thinking about it, because in real life, we don't spend too much time thinking about it. Which one do you think is a bot? Just A, hands. Okay. B, very nice. The answer is both are bots. So it is really hard. Like, look at that. Myra has been tweeting. She has about 500K tweets. So she's been tweeting about 250 times per day, every day for the last 9 years. Sure, Myra, sure. And Noelle, apparently, if you Google a woman with wind blowing in her hair, this is the first image that shows up on Shutterstock. So anywho, that's my talk. And if you have feedback, comments, questions, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
So, if you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll try to get a microphone near you, and you can ask it. Well, I saw your hand first, then I'll go to you.
Do you remember which politician has 0 bots?
I do. I don't want to say. I mean, I felt really bad even showing the names here because, again, no blames, but they're definitely a Republican from middle of America.
Okay. George?
Yeah, I'll ask it. All right, this is a question for Andy. So I'm curious, you talked about pre-post designs, and I'm assuming you're talking about a design where everybody essentially sees the ad. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, what about I'm curious what your thoughts are on like a hybrid approach where you give everybody a pre-exposure and then you randomly assign then you do a random assignment maybe half, and then half the people get the treatment, half don't, and then it's kind of like balancing too, because now you have pre-treatment information, but you still can see if there's a shift up from thinking about it. You give them some sham ad.
Oh, yeah, no. To be really clear, I think I misunderstood what you said initially. This is when there's still randomization after.
I see. Okay, yeah.
So,
Because some
it's a
people thought, I was
placebo
curious, like when you were saying
Yeah.
pre-post, is it you basically don't have a control group and your control group is the pre?
No,
time,
we
or-
still have a placebo.
Okay, that was my question then.
Yeah, there's an annoying thing where different people use pre-post to mean like everybody sees the ad, you measure it pre and post, just that. Yeah, there's people use different language for that.
All right, great. That was my question then.
Cool. Yeah. No. Definitely prefer that over what you were talking about.
So I was like, that's the.
You were like, whoa. Cool. No, 100% agreed there. Don't do that.
Next, anyone else got another question? All right. Could you just pass that down?
Just regarding the data from the New York Times. Maybe this went beyond the scope of your study, but I'm curious to know if you thought there was an impact on the number of comments due to reach that a given article received, if it was boosted on other channels or social media, maybe more eyeballs equals more content or more comments, and did you try to normalize for that at all?
Yeah, no, that was the part that was like missing that I wanted to personally take a look at, because you have that option, I think, for other news outlets, but I think you have to like pay to use their API, so I couldn't do that. So yeah, number of comments and then the word count of the article itself, like those would be maybe some of the good indicators as to like maybe why some articles got more engagement than others, like to kind of answer your question about like the article itself. But yeah, the New York Times API doesn't give that information with like the shares and engagements, like the clicks and all of that you would expect. So definitely one limitation for that part. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else while I grab the mic back? I see over here. Perfect. Thanks. Also about the New York Times study. You mentioned that word count was one of your significant factors. What was the direction of that effect? Was it like longer articles got more engagement or the opposite? And why do you think it was that way?
Yeah, I think from my memory, it was the longer the article, the like more engagement it got. It might have been because of just, especially when I showed the opinion section, it might be like especially from those kinds of sections where like people are able to kind of like express their thoughts more and like more content that gives more context over the certain situation. That might be one case, but that would be even a future direction that I'd want to look into, because I was more focused on the more smaller things like the publication date and the section, but that's also something that I'd want to explore more. But yeah, it was like the longer articles. It just, interestingly enough, like got more of that engagement. I guess it's like just because, you know, they had a lot to say on the topic, I guess, and that excited some people. Yeah. I know, I thought so too, yeah.
This is a question regarding the bot analysis. You had mentioned a lot about the level of bot activity, but did you notice any interesting trends in the sentiment of the bot's content?
So I do have that data, but because the API shutdown affected everyone, that's what makes a good exogenous shock. So I also lost my access in the middle of the study, which is what makes such a great exogenous shock, right? So I do have some of that, some data for about some 15,000 bot accounts that I scraped, which could get at what you're asking, but no, I haven't done that yet, because I was very keen to understand if these bots were retweeting or talking about this politician, are they like slamming him or her, or are they praising them? Very good question, thank you.
Following on the same study, I remember there was a slide saying that popularity or mentions declined by about 30%. What was the pre-period and the post-period of the comparison?
Thank you for that. In fact, this will answer that well. The pre-period was Jan 2022 to the API shutdown, so November 2022. The post is December 2022 to March 2024. Yeah, I mean, it's not good resolution here, but yeah.
Andy, how much of your pre-post was taken from Gelman and Hill's electric station example in the ARM book?
Actually, none. Surprisingly, I actually learned about that from one of my coworkers who was like, "Oh, like the Gelman and Hill thing." I was like, oh, neat.
All right, any last questions before we wrap up for the night? Last chance for a poll. Should we ask who's going to win? We'll ask each of you who's going to win, and you have to say it on camera.
I guess I'm stuck with the mic, so I'm going to say I'm like maybe giving Kamala like 2 or 3% edge at most.
Okay.
I'm not super confident.
I echo that sentiment. Truthfully, I don't know. Yeah, I thought she had an advantage a little while ago, but now it's disappearing and all our models are telling us what we don't want to hear.
And last one.
Oh yeah. No, I've been doom scrolling every night. So I've been like looking at all the polls, especially the swing states. So I'm originally from Arizona. So I've been looking at specifically like the early votes, like the ballots on like who's turning them in. And I've been seeing that like quite a bit of Republicans have been showing up early to vote, especially in the swing states and even like in Arizona as well too. So right now I'm gonna say like Trump might have the advantage now. I know you all don't want to hear this, but again, like things change. If you would have asked me last week, I would have probably said Kamala Harris. But just looking at those ballots and who's coming out to vote, I mean, that can change. Like, so yeah, honestly, like I don't know, but right now I'm seeing like I think it's trending towards the Republicans at the moment. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Last chance. If not, all right. Thank you very much. So before we all head out, just remember, next month, November 19th, Erica's speaking about Pixar characters. Pixar characters, Pixar movies. Pixar films. Or films, not movies, films. All right, Pixar films, November 19th. Is that going to be in this building or another building? We don't know yet. Somewhere on this campus will be that meetup. October 28th to 30th is the R in Government Conference. You want to come attend that with code NYHackR. And all these talks are all available from this meetup for 15 years at nyhackr.org, the conference at rstats.ai. December, do we have a December speaker? We do, but we're not saying it. But you want me to say something else? It looks like you're.
October 28th, another election.
Yes, October 28th, the NYAAPOR thing is available. Send out a link to the Slack group. All right, cool. All right, and we're going to the half pint. All right? See everyone at the half pint in a little bit. Thank you all for coming. See you next month.